What's up, folks? Today we're going to talk about constructors in Java. You don't know what constructors are? Well, don't worry, I'll explain. So, constructors are included in java.lang.reflect package and are basically methods similar to a method and are automatically called whenever we create an instance of our class. So whenever you create an object using the new keyword, your compiler calls the constructor method of your class. And if there is no constructor given, it just calls a default one for memory allocation. And if we take an example, we have our class X, and let's create the instance of this class. We'll say class X C1 equals new class X, put parentheses, and if we run it, our compiler is calling the default constructor of our class since there is no constructor available. And the way we create a constructor is by just like writing any other method in our class. Void class X parentheses curly braces, and we got ourselves a constructor. But what's special about our constructor method is that it must have the same name as its class. Class X is the class name, so your constructor must have the same name. And that's how your compiler distinguishes between other methods and your constructor and calls it automatically because it has the same name as class. So if I rename it to something else, it is a totally different method now. So remember, use the same name. Also, your constructor does not really need a return type like this void, int, or boolean, or whatever the type is. You can safely remove the void keyword. And yeah, we can use access modifiers like public, private, protected from the last video if you remember when declaring the constructor. And let's set it to public for now. So we have our very cool little constructor here, and if we run it, our compiler automatically calls this constructor here from this class object. And of course nothing is happening, so let's print out something in our constructor. Say class X was summoned, and run it again. It prints that out in the console whenever we create an instance of this class. So let's create two more objects of the same class, C2 and C3, and run it. And we can see it prints out class X was summoned 3 times in the console. How cool. Constructors can be parameterized just like methods, so which means that they can have arguments inside. And this class X constructor is a no-arg constructor as it takes no arguments. See this empty parenthesis here? This is a no argument constructor. Now let's try passing some arguments, say int I and int j. So we're just passing two integers. And what do we do with these integers now? Well, let's just add them. So inside this constructor, I will write this print statement which outputs the sum of these integers. And of course, we gotta pass two integers now in our class, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and run it. It prints out 3 and then 7, basically just adding them. But this isn't a good coding practice, believe me. Maybe it will do for testing purposes, but in Java we write a separate method in order to print the result because it's way cooler, and also because we don't need to just display, and also because we don't need to just display the sum of these two numbers because you never asked for it. So write this method void, we'll call it show, and inside this show method just write a print statement that simply outputs I plus j. That's it. But wait a minute, why is our IDE displaying an error here? Well, because it does not know what I and j is. We only declared those two variables inside our constructor, and they are available in the constructor only, and we can't use them anywhere else in our code. So what's the big deal, you may ask? Just declare them explicitly in the top and the error is gone. And that's right, you can just declare them on the top and there is no error now. Now let's call our brand new show method to see if it works. So we'll write c1.show and c2.show and now run it. It runs, but what the hell, it just prints out a 0 and 0, which is definitely not the sum of these two numbers. So what is going on here? Blame the code. It's obvious. we declared int I and int j on the top, and by default these values, their values are set to 0. And this show method is totally unaware of what our in God's name is going on inside our constructor. So it just adds the default values 0 and 0 and prints out the sum, which is also 0. And also because we are literally doing nothing with these numbers in the constructor. We asked for two integers and then gave it two integers and did nothing. It's kind of like raising money in high school for the annual farewell party, and then there is nothing, like really nothing. So anyways, yeah, inside our constructor we just write I equals I, and on the next line j equals j, telling it that these I and j that are being passed to the constructor are now equal to the I and j data members of our class. And whenever we run it and pass these two integers as our arguments, the compiler sets these integers to I and j of our class, and upon calling the show method, it should display the sum of I and j. So run it. Well, now what? It still displays a 0. I think you probably guessed it. Well, the reason to that is because the compiler can't figure out what I and j are we talking about. So it's like, okay, set I equals to I, but why would you do that? I mean, I is I. So to refer to the current object and tell our compiler that by I and j we mean the I and j of this class that we passed in as arguments, we use this keyword. Yeah, this keyword, this one, followed by a dot, and then the variable name, this dot I equals I, and this dot j equals j, which makes a lot of sense now. So keep that in mind. And finally, everything looks good now, so go ahead and run it. It prints out 3 and 7, just like we expected. And another approach to that would be to just rename these data members to something else, not to cause any kind of ambiguity. So instead of using I and j, we'll say first, comma, second. And also in the show method, first plus second. And we won't need this keyword anymore in our constructor. So first equals I and second equals j. Run it, works fine. Also, it will work just fine if you just put this keyword there. Yeah, because it already knows we are referring to the class as it has unique variable names. So always choose a good variable name. Keep that in mind. And before we end this video, I want to talk about constructor overloading, which means constructors can be overloaded just like methods. That means we can write another constructor in our class. For instance, just copy this constructor and paste it below. And we'll just take two strings instead of integers, string I and string j, in our second constructor, and just print I plus j out in the console. And we're putting double quotes inside the space. So we're just concatenating these two strings and create another instance of this class x c3 equals new class x, and pass two strings, hello and raz, in the console. And when you run it, your compiler checks whether there is such a constructor in your class which takes true string parameters, and then it decides which one to call based on the parameters passed. So both of these work now. And to summarize what we learned today, a constructor in Java is just like a method with no return type and is used to initialize the state of an object. It has the same name as its class and is invoked automatically. Constructors are of two types, no-arg and parameterized constructor. There is no copy constructor in Java, unlike C++. However, we can achieve that by passing a constructor as an argument or assigning the values to another object. So I hope that clears it up. And in the next video, God willing, we'll talk about taking input from users and all the cool stuff in Java. So thank you for watching. Have a great day. Signing out.